So first off, I'm going to give you some tips for students renting in college accommodation. And the first tip I'd say is to view the property before signing a tenancy agreement. Also, I'd say you must check the credentials of the property and service provider. You must ensure the accommodation meets the minimum standards, know the rules on deposits and how much advance rent you have to pay. 5. Know how long your tenancy can be. Understand how to end your tenancy. You cannot be discriminated against also and against when looking for accommodation. So this is also an important tip to keep in mind. And you must also learn about the Rental Tenancy Board's dispute resolution service. And I'll go through this soon enough here and explain to you that there is a mediation service from the Tenancies Board, like the Threshold. They have dispute resolution where there's a third party, where there is a dispute with your landlord and yourself. There is a third party called Threshold, which offers free advice to people for in tenancy agreements, not just student accommodation. So Threshold is an important part of Irish law. Now we'll also say that your tenancy might be different if you're living in shared accommodation where also your landlord lives. So if you're a tenant living in your landlord's home and not living in a self-contained apartment, a landlord and tenancy legislation will not be applicable. So there are, however, steps you can take to ensure a more equitable and a secure experience. The Department of Education has published a voluntary regulatory framework and sample license agreement for students in co-occupied accommodation. So it would be handy to look at the Department of Further Education's website if you're in this situation. Now, as with all tenancy agreements, student accommodation, you should take a photograph of any damage you see, any furniture damage, anything that needs repairs, because if down the line your deposit is in dispute, well then you have these photographic pictures to show the time, the date this damage was already caused before you enter the property, and therefore you have a case, or evidence as I should say, not a case per se. But anyway, what you should do is any outstanding repairs, you should make a list of the furniture, the appliances with the landlord, take photos. As I said, if there are outstanding repairs, documents these prior to moving in. If there is damage prior to moving in, well then the landlord, you must state this in writing that it will be prepared. So before you sign a tenancy agreement, it is a good idea to get the landlord to state in writing that these repairs will be undertaken when you sign the agreement. So also note, a landlord cannot visit your accommodation without your permission unless in an emergency or a genuine effort has been made to contact you. So word for your health. Now, students in tenants in student specific accommodation has most of the same rights as private tenants. However, there are some differences. From the 20th of July 2024, there was new rules set out for student-specific accommodation tenancies licensed under the Residential Tenancies Amendment Act 2004. And what are these? They say you can only pay more than 1 month's rent in advance if you're paying both rent and tuition fees for the same provider. You cannot be forced to pay for student-specific accommodation during the summer when you don't need it. So that's an important point to note. And your tenancy or license agreement should be no more than 41 weeks unless you ask for longer. So it automatically terminates after the 41-week period. And if your landlord does not comply with the 41-week rule, you can report this to the Residential Tenancies Board or Residential Tenancies Board for Dispute Resolution Service. You can also terminate your fixed term tenancy anytime between 1st of May, 1st of October each year for any reason. But outside of these dates, the existing rules about ending a fixed term tenancy apply, and you can only terminate your tenancy for specific reasons. So therefore, it is a good idea to keep these rules in mind when you are signing a tenancy agreement. Consider the summer months. You're a student in college, well then you won't be having the property in the summer months. So it is a good idea to keep this in mind, that you only sign for the necessary months that your tenancy is needed, and you don't pay the full 3 months or the full 12 months, which is not needed and will cost you more while you're away. Now I know times are difficult, but it is against the law for landlords to make you sign the full 12 months against your will. Now, as I said, the limits the amount of deposit or rent in advance that the landlord can ask people to pay to secure a tenancy. There is a limit on that, and it's under the 2021 Act, and it was amended. An advance payment of rent cannot exceed 1 month's rent also. So there is an exception now to these rules for students who occupy student-specific accommodation, and they may pay more than 1 month's rent in advance if they wish to do so with the agreement of the accommodation provider. So therefore, as I was saying, look, it's hard to get rental properties now. You might have to pay for the full 12 months. If the landlord is willing to extend your period of contract for the following year, and you really want to keep this accommodation, well then it's up to yourselves whether you sign that agreement for the 12 month or not. Now, how much notice does a landlord or a student-specific accommodation need to give to end a tenancy? Providers of student-specific accommodation must also provide a minimum of 28 days notice to end a tenancy agreement with a student tenant. Once there has been no breach of obligations and the tenancy has lasted more than 6 months, providers of SSA, that's student-specific accommodation, are now required to provide the same amount of notice periods as the private rental sector, which is related to the length of the tenancy. So providers must also honour the term of a fixed term lease. So you must honour your lease when you sign it. So what the contract says, it has to be abided by. So if you signed for the 12-month period, well then you have to abide by it. If you signed to take off the summer months and not the full 12 months, well then you're entitled to have that contract honoured, because it's known as a gentleman's handshake. Now, if you do breach your tenancy agreement, well then the landlord has the option to terminate your tenancy. But if you must be served with a 28-day notice for tenancy breach or a 7-day notice for antisocial behaviour. So if you're having parties all the time, well then he can terminate, or he or she can terminate the tenancy within 7 days notice for antisocial behaviour. But look, you could bring this to the Residential Tenancies Board if you have a dispute about this. But if they have evidence against you, well, you're going to have to get evidence for you to say that you weren't antisocial behaviour from the neighbours or such. Say that you were a quiet neighbour, a letter, what may be. So you'll need evidence to support that against the landlord, and the landlord will need evidence to support the antisocial behaviour against you. So there's a top tip: be quiet when you're drinking. Have a peaceful one, no rowdiness. Now, it is also a good idea to keep rent receipts of any payments that you have made to a landlord. So you'll have these as evidence just in case a dispute does arise about payment of your rent. So this goes for both student rented accommodation or if you're living in home with the landlord. So it is advisable to keep rent receipts, bank transfers, all these, keep the receipts. And also, if you do purchase furniture, maybe that could be a good idea, I suppose, to keep them receipts also, because you may need them further as evidence that the property was damaged and you had no option but to get the furniture to make it habitable. So the Tenancies Board can decide different dispute resolutions with students, well not just with students, also normal people that are in private rented accommodation. This applies to also. The agency threshold deals with dispute resolution and is a good alternative to as going to court, where again it's going to cost you a van load of money, and you don't want that because lawyers get all the money for this, and when you're just a poor student starting off in life, it is pretty difficult. So the threshold is a good place to go to a great agency. Also, Citizens Advice can help you towards that if you are in trouble with landlord tenancy dispute. So look, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was just a short summary about the law of student accommodation and landlord tenancy rights in Ireland. So take care, do hit the subscribe. I'll have more great videos on the law to help you out along the way in life.